Outside the city of Boardman, Oregon, 3 hours east of Portland, Luz Barajas proudly picks fruit from her trees. She loves her garden here, but not the water that comes up from the well on her land. It is contaminated with nitrates.
Y dicen que también pues en las verduras y todo se viene el nitrato.
Nitrates are chemicals you can't see or smell, but in high concentrations, they're dangerous to humans and can cause multiple problems, including cancer. Luz does not drink the water from the well. She knows it's too dangerous. Her daughter-in-law, Ruth Lopez, lives nearby and also has a contaminated well. It's been that way for a long time in these parts.
Y también te desilusionas porque dices, pues no, siempre lo mismo y lo mismo y lo mismo y no hay resultados. ¿O qué está pasando? ¿Verdad? Sí como te desanimas.
They get discouraged because this is not a new discovery. The state of Oregon has known for at least 33 years that the aquifer under this ground is contaminated with dangerous levels of nitrates. Think about that, 33 years. And yet no agency, not the EPA or DEQ or any other number of agencies involved, have taken forceful action that changed the numbers. There have been a lot of meetings and lots of reports, but no meaningful change in the level of pollution.
She will go out and around, bring them back.
Jim Doherty is a rancher in Morrow County.
There she goes.
He has working farm dogs and 750 head of cattle. He's also one of the few politicians in this area who publicly sounded the alarm over the polluted aquifer.
I knew it was time that somebody stood up. Somebody had to stand up. I said, as a politician, right, you're always faced with the challenge, right? Is this the hill you're willing to die on? And when I looked at this, I said, this is literally the hill as a politician that I'm willing to die on, that others don't have to.
Doherty chaired the Morrow County Commission in 2022. He declared a countywide state of emergency after tests found dangerous levels of nitrates in wells that were previously deemed safe.
At that point in time, I knew we had a colossal challenge.
A challenge known to the state and growing for decades. Back in 1989, the state of Oregon passed the Oregon Groundwater Quality Protection Act. The very next year, in 1990, samples showed nitrate levels above 10 milligrams per liter in the groundwater in northern Morrow and Umatilla counties. The EPA says readings above 10 milligrams is dangerous. The results triggered a declaration under that new state law. It created the Lower Umatilla Basin Groundwater Management Area with the mouthful acronym LUBGWAMA. The area covers 562 square miles. The aquifer beneath the land is contaminated with varying levels of nitrates. A state study determined the pollution came from irrigated farming, pastures, confined animal feedlots, and commercial food processors. As part of the Groundwater Protection Act, a LUBGWAMA committee was set up to report to the DEQ to, quote, work with and advise state agencies who are required to develop an action plan that will reduce groundwater contamination. The committee was made up mostly of industry and government officials. There were studies and reports, and in 1997, a decision to move forward, asking everyone to try to do their best. The committee, quote, agreed to promote a voluntary approach for addressing the groundwater contamination area. Jim Doherty was not surprised.
I think when the state first reached out in '90 and said you have to form a committee, right, to look into this, to start turning this effort around, it was made up of 100% of folks that were invested in the riches that it was bringing, right? And it was the fox guarding the hen house, if I might. And they were just kicking the can down the road.
There would be no mandatory changes to any practices. No changes for farmers whose fertilizer can contribute nitrates to the groundwater. No significant changes for the 13 confined feedlot operators that spread manure with nitrates as fertilizer on their fields. No significant changes for food processors that each year collectively spread billions of gallons of wastewater on farm fields, much of it contaminated with nitrates. And so, as you might expect, industry kept doing what it had always done. Outreach programs were created to warn people with wells, and there were suggestions for industries on best practices, but no one suggests cutting back on the industries themselves. And a chronically weak and underfunded Department of Environmental Quality would do little more than watch.
DEQ first identified the problem over 30 years ago now, and it has gotten continuously worse since then.
Mitch Wolgamott retired as the interim administrator for the eastern region of the DEQ. He was also part of the Lubguama Committee around the year 2000.
I learned early on when I got involved in this that the committee that DEQ set up, a groundwater management area committee, who was charged with coming up with some solutions. It frankly was dominated by food processors and irrigators. So it was kind of the chicken garden, the hen house kind of a deal.
They weren't looking for the solutions that were really going to be a solution.
That's the way I would put it. And I learned quite early that they weren't real interested in having a lot of publicity. So people didn't know what was going on. And even though the government knew and the processors and farmers themselves knew, they didn't really have much incentive to fix it because nobody was complaining.
Wolgamott said over the years he alerted lawmakers and suggested mandatory restrictions for industry might be needed, but nothing was done, and eventually he retired. Starting in 2000, the DEQ Water Quality Division put out 9 annual reports updating various efforts to educate the public and to urge best practices for industry. The report also documents that the pollution of the aquifer continued to get worse. And while that was going on, the Port of Morrow was revealing how weak the DEQ enforcement was by repeatedly violating its wastewater permit, which is designed to protect the aquifer. The port collects wastewater from food processors and other companies connected to its land. Some of that wastewater is contaminated with nitrates. The port has more water than it can handle, so it's pumped out to farm fields, some owned by the port, others owned by farmers as far as 16 miles away. According to DEQ records, the port has violated its permit more than 2,000 times from 2007 until 2022. The DEQ settled most violations, but then did fine the port $129,000 in 2015, and in October of 2023 announced the port would pay $1.9 million in fines for permit violations, with the money going to safe drinking water programs in northern Morrow and Umatilla counties. The port will also pay $483,000 in fines to the state. At the same time, the state did not require the port to slow or stop its wastewater discharges. Instead, it agreed the port could continue to spread nitrate-laced water in the winter months until 2026, when it would have to stop and hold the water over the winter, a time when there is little plant growth to absorb those nitrates. Jim Doherty, the rancher-turned-county commissioner, raised the issue with the port.
One of the port commissioners said, "Dear God, what would you have us do? Shut down one of the industries?" Well, if you're going to trade that industry functioning and the dollars they're making with lives that are being lost, hell yes.
The port is just one of the players here, one of the most visible because they have state water permits. I wanted to talk with their leaders about their wastewater program, but they declined. In May of 2022, the then director, Richard Whitman, during a meeting of the DEQ Commission, acknowledged the problem in the Lubguama area and the lack of power to do much about it.
We've already talked a little bit about Port Morrow, and I mentioned Lamb Weston also. What I really want to say is those are two important facilities operations, but they are by no means the only source of groundwater contamination in that area. We know that we also have groundwater contamination that's resulted from some of the confined animal feeding operations in the area. We also, and perhaps more broadly, have issues with regard to fertilizer application by agricultural operations in the area.
Agricultural operations means irrigated farmland. He also said the DEQ does not have the laws it needs to protect Oregon's groundwater.
DEQ for several biennia now has suggested that we need a broader public process around our programs for protecting groundwater. And do we need legislation? to improve the systems that we have for groundwater protection.
And so, nothing changed, leaving people who rely on well water exposed to pollution and angry.
Our county commissioners could stop it, but they don't. They can say no. Our port commissioners can say no, let's clean it up. They don't. I'm not blaming the farmers, I'm not blaming the industry, but they all got to work together to get this solved. And they need to solve it right away.
It's a problem that many believe regulators have allowed to continue for far too long. So what do you think about the fact that this has been a growing problem for 30 years?
I'm embarrassed for our leaders in the community, those that have covered it up and kicked it under the rug for so many years. I don't even know where to go with that one, but
Mitch Wolgamott has watched the lack of progress since his retirement from the DEQ. And does it also help that it's low-income Spanish-speaking folks that are mostly impacted?
Oh, absolutely, that's a factor.
That's too bad.
The people with the least voice tend to be the low-income and Hispanic folks.
Farmer Jake Madison, a member of the current Lubguama Committee, disagrees.
But has it taken so long because there wasn't much publicity, or there was confusion, or was there a piece of it because it's mostly poor Hispanic folks that are using these wells, or?
I wouldn't say that that's the case. I would say that the confusion is who has the power to do anything about it. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, which regulatory agency is in charge, which county's in charge.
Despite the questions, one fact is undeniable. After all this time, the problem is not better. It's worse. The voluntary actions are not working to reduce the groundwater contamination. The community wonders if that will ever change. Maria Martinez has lived in the area 32 years.
Because it's like we're out here, we shouldn't be suffering here with poisonous water, endangering our children, having health issues with them, or other people up here that have issues to have more issues on top with this water.
One thing is changing. The first Lubguama committee eventually gave way to a second committee, and then that second committee was shut down, and now there's a third committee studying the problem.
So we need to show the community that irrigated ag is doing its job and doing it efficiently, and not just by words, but with data.
In August of 2023, the third Lubguama committee gathered in Boardman for a work session that included presentations from leaders in the Department of Agriculture and complicated diagrams of how various agencies were involved in the issue. Committee members broke up into groups to brainstorm ways to work on the problem.
We have our groundwater database. It doesn't talk to DEQ's groundwater database. It doesn't talk to, what OHA is doing or what the counties are doing.
It was almost as if the contamination in northern Morrow and Umatilla counties had just been discovered.